Let us now enter into a time of reverence as we prepare for the sharing of our thoughts on this great issue. We light this chalice to celebrate the power of the fourth principle, the responsible search for truth and meaning. The fourth principle eventually shaped the great abolitionist war, leading to Juneteenth and the powerful 13th, the abolition of the slave labor phase of the capitalist epoch. Today, we apply that very same principle as we discuss and debate the issue of an eighth principle. Let us pray that we can achieve synergy, the unity of opposites without the kind of civil divisiveness which made Juneteenth necessary. Disagreement is not divisiveness, and angry outbursts are not harmful, provided that they occur in the sacred spirit of mutual respect. So may this chalice light our way to the responsible search for truth and meaning.
So at this point, I want to call on Tom Close, who's a member at Second Unitarian Church in Chicago. Started out with the UU congregation that's in Palatine, Illinois, and then was in Arizona for a while, as a youth advisor, came back to Chicago, was back at Second Unitarian, or joined Second Unitarian, was a board chair, and he's in recent years, he's been the founder and executive director of Crossing Borders Music. So at this time, Tom, you have the floor to present the pro case for the proposed eighth principle. So it's yours.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thanks for having me. I want to thank also Rebecca Pace, whose idea this debate was, I believe, as far as I know. Reverend Finley, thank you, and Reverend Craig, great to be here with you. And as Reverend Dr. Finley said, happy Juneteenth to everybody. I'm here today largely because, well, a number of things, but one thing in particular that compelled me to make this case. Some years ago, I was teaching cello, as I do, in Garfield Park, which, for those not familiar with Chicago, is a economically poor Black neighborhood on the west side. It's been redlined, it's been systemically disinvested in, and it faces the consequences of historic systemic racism and ongoing systemic racism every day. And my young student's mom and I were chatting after her lesson, and she told me about how they were driving a loaner vehicle because their van, which was parked at the side of the road, while they were sitting in it, she was sitting in it with her two young kids, it was hit by a drunk driver. It was very badly damaged. Thankfully, all of them were okay, but the van was, I don't know if it was totaled, it was very, very badly damaged. It was no longer drivable. And she told me about how a white police officer came to the scene and saw this white drunk driver and saw them, this Black family, and he decided to let this drunk driver go. There was no breathalyzer, there was no blood alcohol test, he was just let free. And what I remember most was not even that description of what happened, it was the way in which she related it to me. She was even casual about how she told me about it. Her exact words were, "Don't let it ruin your weekend." She expected nothing different. This was simply her expectation of the way things were. And at that moment, I realized that this family was not physically safe in this country because of their Blackness. And that if I wanted them to be safe and other millions of other Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, in this country that I and all of us are compelled to act and speak out and change those conditions. I remember another incident about a year ago after the Black Lives Matter protests, when a young student who was usually so outgoing and chipper and smiling was suddenly withdrawn, and I asked him if he wanted to talk about it, and he didn't say anything at first, and he said, no, it's okay. And I realized as he started talking to me, he had seen George Floyd being murdered, and he realized that that could be him or one of his family members or one of his loved ones. It could be any of our Black family members, Indigenous family members, friends, people of color. This is a reality of life in this country, is that people of color are not physically safe in their own bodies because of who they are. And because of our Unitarian Universalist beliefs, we are compelled to do something about that. I wish I could say that these were isolated incidents, but if you look at almost any of the very extensive research on racial injustice and racial imbalances in this country, you see that there are systemic problems in our criminal justice system, as well as employment and housing and you name it, education. These are not isolated experiences, unfortunately. So the reason we need this 8th principle is that we need people of color to be physically safe in this country. We all need to come together and work to crush a culture that says that white lives matter more. I bet that many of you are thinking we as Unitarian Universalists already have principles that dedicate us to fighting against that, because we say all people have inherent worth and dignity, and that is true in theory. Unfortunately, in this country, historically, it's simply a fact that when we've talked about all men, we have implicitly meant all white men. And when we talk about equal protection under the law, we mean equal protection for white people under the law. And I wish that weren't true. It crushes me that that's true, but it's simply where we're at. And that's the reason that we need to make explicit a commitment to anti-racism, that all people truly means all people, regardless of race. I also wish I could say that that implicit assumption was true in the larger society, but not true in Unitarian Universalist circles. But unfortunately, I can't say that either. One of my earliest memories growing up in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palatine was one of the parents of one of my friends who was a longtime member there. We were just chatting, casually making fun of Ebonics. More recently, I remember at the Unitarian Universalist summer camp where I go to, which draws especially engaged UU youth, that these white youth were telling jokes using the N-word, and they didn't even see anything wrong with that. They didn't understand why that was a problem. This was very recently. At my own church, I, for a long time, noticed that when Black visitors or other visitors of color come, they're not greeted the same way that white visitors are greeted. In fact, when Black members of my church made suggestions for the church to the board, it was 8 months before the board even brought up those suggestions for discussion. In fact, I remember being on the board at the time and asking every month, can we talk about these suggestions from the Black members of our church? Can we talk about these suggestions from the Black members of our church? Can we talk about the suggestions from the Black members of our church? Can we talk about the suggestions from the Black members of our church? Can we talk about the suggestions from the Black members of our church? Can we talk about the suggestions from the Black members of our church? Can we talk about the suggestions from the Black members of our church? Can we talk about the suggestions from the Black members of the church? And the 8th time I said, you know, we have a problem here. If these suggestions had been brought up by white members of the church, there's no way in my mind that they would be not even brought up for discussion for 8 months. It would be tempting to say that these problems, while maybe real, are not as consequential as my student in Garfield Park and so many others like her, not being physically safe in her own body. And in some ways, maybe that's true. However, the problem is that this attitude that says that it's okay to have a worship service where pretty much all the readings come from white men and all the materials come from white men, and that's okay, that is part of the same culture that says that it's okay that this black student is treated this way by the police. It's branches from the same tree with the same root in that culture that says that white lives matter more. Speaking of double standards, I want to be clear about something that I think trips up a lot of opponents of the eighth principle. There's a lot of talk about what accountability would mean. And it's funny to me because this is a concept that actually we already readily accept when it's almost any other group who we're being accountable to. If people who use wheelchairs say, you know, this church is not accessible to me in a wheelchair, and so we put up a ramp to make an accessible entrance, and they say, you know, it's still, this ramp doesn't work, it's too steep, we can't get up. Nobody would argue it would be appropriate to say, no, you're wrong, the ramp is fine. If we put together, if non-parents put together a childcare program for church events for parents, and parents said, you know, this childcare program doesn't serve our needs as parents, this is not meeting our needs for childcare, nobody would say it would be okay.
1 minute.
Nobody would say it would be okay to say, you're wrong, parents, this program is fine. So when we design anti-racism programming and activities, we need to make sure that the people who it serves, the people who are directly affected by racism, say, yes, this is meeting our needs. Obviously, people of color are not a monolith, and there will be differences of opinions. There are different ways that we can do that, but we need to make sure that broadly this is meeting the needs of Unitarian Universalists of color. We can unite across racial lines to do this work. Any of us, no matter who we are, can come together, and I think it's appropriate here, speaking with a group that has multiracial in its name, we can work together to crush this culture that says that the lives of people of color, Black people, Indigenous people matter less. We can work together to crush that culture. And in fact, our faith compels us to do that. I want to wish again everybody a happy Juneteenth. I also have to say, I don't think this is the appropriate day to be having this debate. And again, I think if it were not Black people who had brought up this resolution to fight
your time is up. Your time is up. You've run over your 15 minutes.
We started at 11 after, right? Or 12 after?
12 after, and I have about 23 after.
So that's been about
Okay,
12?
okay. I'm short. I'm in there.
Okay.
You're right.
Thank you, Alan. No worries. I don't think this is the appropriate day to do this. And in fact, if it were another group, if the identity of the group in question were different, I think it would be easy to see why it's inappropriate. If Jewish Unitarian Universalists called on us to resolve to dismantle anti-Semitism, it would be inappropriate, I think, to argue against that resolution on Holocaust Remembrance Day. So this is, I believe, the wrong day to be having this debate. In conclusion, if we want people like my Black student, our friends and loved ones of color, to be physically safe in this country, we need to be active in committing to dismantling racism and other forms of oppression. In fact, all we need to do to perpetuate the conditions that make Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color unsafe in this country, all we need to do is nothing. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it." So we are called by our faith. We really have no choice to be impelled by our faith to adopt the eighth principle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm sorry I had my timing wrong. I apologize for that.
No worries, Alan.
And okay, so now I'm going to do a introduction for our next speaker, which is Reverend Craig Morrow. So Craig Morrow is a graduate of the University of Chicago and is the Starr King School for Ministry. He's lived and studied in India, Singapore, Thailand, and Japan. He speaks Thai and Tamil, as well as Spanish and English. In Thailand, he worked with a women's rights organization centered in Patpong, the world's largest red light district, where he taught English and wrote copy for the first community newspaper for district sex workers. He was Pacific Central District's conference and program advisor for LRY and later YRUU for 10 years, and also served by Youth Leaders Invitation as minister to the UU Continental Conference. He led the first class on Islam at Starr King School, inviting Muslim leaders to participate and present. And he is a founding member of the Tri-Cities Interfaith Alliance in Washington State, which includes local UU and UCC churches, as well as local synagogues, mosques, and Sikh Gurdwaras. He lives in Portland, where he serves the Y East UU congregation half-time. Craig, or Reverend Craig, the floor is yours.
I'll get right to it. All Unitarian Universalists oppose bigotry and oppression in every form, even if they sometimes do so imperfectly. We reject any and all hierarchies of human beings based on physical characteristics. We reject any and all moral hierarchies based on sexual identity or preference, national origin, language, or religious affiliation. We reject the notion that the needs of the human species justify degradation of the national environment at the expense of other species of the non-organic structures of that environment. We revere beauty as something far deeper than physical appearance, and we celebrate freedom. We make all of this plain, not through negative statements, not through crushing anyone, not by taking a hostile stance, but by a covenant to affirm and promote 7 clear positive principles: the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Look at the beautiful flow here, beginning with a bow to every human being, moving to a bow to the living web of existence, then ending in a moment of silence to consider the momentousness of what was just said and done. These principles serve as 7 guiding stars, but stars are more than points of distant light. They have heat and mass and gravity. They pull us toward themselves while they also radiate power towards us, through us, and beyond us. Their pull and their penetration are one, indivisible, irresistible. And why would a religious movement settle for anything less? Each of these 7 clearly meets the definition of a principle. Here's a dictionary: a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. Principles should be as close to forever and always in their scope and intent as we limited human beings can manage to put into words. They should be easy to understand, even for those who may not agree with them completely or at all. Ours move in a beautiful arc from the individual to society to the cosmos and back again. An open, expanding circle that includes everyone and everything. They end at the right moment, leaving us in reverent silence within the, quote, interdependent web of all existence of which we are part. But here's the language of what's being proposed as an 8th UU principle. We will journey together towards spiritual wholeness by building a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, that's capitalized, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. This is clearly not a principle. Longer than the first three principles combined, it's a policy or mission statement that calls for active participation in an ongoing conflict between, among, and even within persons. All of our current 7 principles deny any real or lasting basis for such a conflict, saying in effect that we are all one, our differences matter less than what connects us, we shall overcome those differences. The language of the proposed 8th principle commits Unitarian Universalists to an endless war on a racism that's conceived as both an enemy without and an enemy within. And of course, soldiers in a war need discipline. The command to accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions suggests the possibility of disciplinary measures to be enacted against those who do not or will not participate. We see this happening now in the recent silencing and punishment of ministers who conscientiously object to this militarizing spirit. The idea of being accountable for the sincerity or effectiveness of our actions, thoughts, or feelings as ordered participants in an ongoing conflict is unprecedented in Unitarian Universalism. To whom must we make such an accounting? Under threat of what sanctions, punishment, or other discipline? Who makes the determination about what is racism, or in what, where, or whom we find it? Each individual UU? Or will there be a panel or local panel of judges? Ibram X. Kendi proposes that we establish in the nation and permanently fund a Department of Anti-Racism, this is Kendi now, Department of Anti-Racism, DOA, comprised of formally trained experts on racism and no political appointees. The DOA would be responsible for pre-clearing all local, state, and federal public policies to ensure they won't yield racial inequity, monitor those policies, investigate private racist policies where racial inequity surfaces, and monitor public officials for expressions of racist ideas. The DOA would be empowered with disciplinary tools to wield over and against policymakers and public officials who do not voluntarily change their racist policies and ideas. Please read this statement carefully sometime and give it some thought. Is the UUA proposing some version of Kendi's DOA? Would most of our members be comfortable with such a permanent department at the UUA or such a committee in their local congregations? Or perhaps it would be some sort of unelected, unimpeachable, traveling racism assessor appointed by the UUA to check on our ideas and use, quote, disciplinary tools to wield over and against us when we fall short in or disagree with their assessment of our thoughts, words, and actions. Are we happy with this authoritarian vision of the faith of the free? It's easy to imagine accountable dismantling taking even more troubling turns. If we are measuring and keeping accounts now as part of our UU experience, those who dismantle more racism might seem to count more or hold more in their accounts than others among us. The more racism I dismantle, the higher I will stand, the more I will count. As an active dismantler UU, I will count more than a non-dismantler UU. Will our prowess at dismantling now be assessed and measured as a regular part of our UU experience? Should we all expect to receive grades at the end of each church year or titles? Dismantler level 1, dismantler level 2, gold star dismantler. Is that what we really want? What's next? What could come next? This is also easy to imagine, especially after the many real-world examples we've seen in recent years. The most numerically accountable way to dismantle institutional oppressions would be to reduce the number of oppressor organizations and or the number of their members. Such notions of accountable dismantling under a religious mantle have become very familiar to us since 9/11/2001. Should we be completely surprised if some feel they must now take dismantling to this next level in acts of explosive witness? And of course, I know those wouldn't represent the UUism anyone wants any more than those 9/11 attackers represented Islam. But if this seems exaggerated, please consider recent actions by the new discipline and punish incarnation of the UU Ministers Association, as it has worked to destroy the careers and reputations of minister after minister in recent years. UUMA victims have also suffered extreme health effects, which seriously impact their families. Look at the banning of dissenting ministers from formerly welcoming pulpits. Look at the attempts to physically destroy their books and to encourage social media pile-ons in which hundreds of so-called ministers condemn a colleague's words before even reading them. And we received a letter from one colleague saying, don't read them. Don't read the book, just condemn it. Look at some of the comments posted on militant UU websites. Do we really want to see more passionate UUs? Should we be guided by the actions that we've seen by other passionate believers and the extremes to which they are willing to go? Won't passionate believers on the other side be encouraged to respond by doing more of the same? We can see in the 8th principle a vision of the children of light locked in eternal struggle with the children of darkness, one of the worst ideas that religion has to offer, if not the very worst. I think that we can do better. Our 7 existing principles show us how. They respond to all forms of bigotry and oppression by reaching beyond them, not by locking horns in battle. The proposed 8th principle is a house of cards that stands only if we agree that there is substantial racism already or permanently present in ourselves and our UU institutions. But this is not an assertion to which all UUs agree, nor have we been honestly asked to share our thoughts about it in a truly open debate or by means of a universal, confidential ballot or survey. This is not sufficient grounds for changing the spirit of our carefully crafted core document from one of peace to one of conflict. But make no mistake, and I want to be very clear about this, the 8th principle has been promoted by deeply caring people who are concerned, who are genuinely concerned about pervasive injustices. Speaking and sharing the words that they have composed is very important to them, and they should not be scorned because their cherished words do not express what can properly be called a principle. An alternative sits right in front of us. The UU purposes statement, which I'll wager some of us have not even read, is essentially our mission statement. And such statements, mission statements, are not forever and always, but they're reviewed on a more regular basis than core principles are. Usually every 5 years or so, they say, for a good mission statement. We could suggest that since it seems so important to a large number of us to repeat these words liturgically, to incant them, and to see them in print on documents, they might have a temporary home in the UU purposes statement. The logical place is just before the closing paragraph that disavows and prohibits any creedal test for UUs. Alan, can we show that slide? Yeah, let's see, I need to get out so I can continue with my own manuscript. There we go. Thank you, Alan. This shows an alternative placement. You can see what I've done here is put the 8th principle in as a principle, and I've put the 8th principle in as part of the purposes statement. I'll run through it. The purposes of the UUA Unitarian Universalist Association shall devote its resources and exercise its corporate powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. The primary purpose of the association is to serve the needs of its member congregations, organize new congregations, extend and strengthen Unitarian Universalist institutions, and implement its principles. The association, I've underlined this statement, the association, this is our existing statement, declares and affirms its special responsibility and that of its member societies and organizations to promote the full participation of persons in all of its and their activities and in the full range of human endeavor without regard to race, color, sex, disability, affectional or sexual orientation, age, or national origin, and without requiring adherence to any particular interpretation of religion or to any particular religious belief or creed. And now here's where I would propose we might place the eighth principle language. We will journey together towards spiritual wholeness by building a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. And now we come to the existing last paragraph. Nothing herein shall be deemed to infringe upon the individual freedom of belief, which is inherent in the Universalist and Unitarian heritages, or to conflict with any statement of purpose, covenant, or bond of union used by any society unless such is used as a creedal test. And we can take that off the screen now. Thanks so much, Alan. And I could send that to anybody who wants it, the comparative document.
Okay, you got about
You
1
can
minute,
have a look at,
Greg.
what's that?
1 minute, last
1
minute.
minute, okay. Well, so we can still think of this, we can think of this last statement in those purposes as our freedom clause. We also might ask if the underlined statement above it already does the work of the statement of the proposed eighth principle. We must interrogate the notion that we are personally or institutionally racist in spite of our own self-understanding, as corporate trainer Robin DiAngelo might assert, by asking if this does not, in effect, require of us, quote, adherence to a particular interpretation of religion or to a particular religious belief or creed. You might not see it or feel it, but when you look at yourself or your church, but you must believe that it's really there because I say so and I speak on behalf of who? God, beloved community, who do you think you are? Many will still object to the conflict-centered nature of the language of the eighth principle, but the freedom clause should help make it clear that no one can be drafted to participate in any accountable dismantling of racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions that others have defined for them over and against their own conscience and understanding of themselves and their institutions. Our principles are a vital part of what makes us who we are, and they must only be changed after the deepest and fullest debate and discussion that we can manage. We haven't had that yet, but we must. We must.
Thank you, Craig. And now I'd like to have us move to our closing activity. Dr. Finley Campbell is going to lead us in some of that.
First of all, I just love what we have done today. This is what we have been dreaming of. Agreement and disagreement in the same room. I belong to that philosophy which says, give me a thesis, then give me a strong antithesis, and then by God, we can achieve synergy. With 51% going with the truth that might be operational in the contradiction. Unity of opposites is what governs existence, and the search for synergy is our UU calling. And so these are called last words, and then I will end with closing words. And so we have ended this fourth principle event.
Eighth principle.
I'm calling it a fourth principle because we have struggled.
Okay.
We have had a search. We've had a responsible search for truth and meaning as we have debated the eighth principle. Okay, is that okay?
Oh, that's okay.
All right, right on, my brother. That's right. In the eighth principle, there is the fourth principle. And we've done it without the need for a good relations committee. So Brother Trudeau and I were put out of work. We have wrestled with this question and we have disagreed. We've gotten excited And yet, because of this circle of respect that I referred to earlier, which to me is greater than love, we have managed to achieve, if not synergy yet, we now understand more clearly where we are coming from. And there was some suggestion for a possible point of unity on the question of keeping the words but placing it in a different area. But we are the Unitarian Universalist Multiracial Unity Action Council. And we are opposed to the eighth principle in a variety of ways that you have heard this evening. I am the radical in the group as the Black brother, the Black reverend, one who has gone through segregation in the 30s, crypto integration in Detroit in the 40s, lived in Atlanta in the 50s, came of age in Atlanta in the 60s, and became organized with the Black Panther Party in the 70s, organizing white folks, organizing white folks in the state of Indiana. So I bring to this closing this incredible experience. I am opposed to the eighth principle on its face, on its origins, and I agree. I would not banter, syntax, legalisms, illogical constructions. The very concept of multicultural is abhorrent to me, particularly since we were aiming to be a multiracial, multicultural denomination. So here we are, getting ready to go our separate ways. I argue, and will continue to argue, we live in a desegregated culture, not a white culture, not an oppressive culture. For those of you who believe honestly in your hearts that racism is in the DNA of the American founding, then you know nothing of my great-great-great-great-grandfather, John Finley, an Irish slaveholder who fell in love with his Indian concubine, my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. And I proudly claim his name, Finley. So I'm a bit of a Black Irishman, to be sure. We go forward from this place with the knowledge that we will go to GA 2021 much more aware of the issues than before. In a real sense, these are the kinds of discussions that the Mid-America region, for example, should have sponsored. Instead of eliminating the entire Mid-America region meeting, this could have been an excellent, at least for the Midwest folks, I don't know about you other folks, but at least in the Midwest, this would have been a powerful way to prepare ourselves for the GA. At any rate, we have done what we can. Someone asked, what is all this about really? What's the hidden agenda of UMIAC? Our open agenda is to have a plenary session in 2022, 2021 is over, 2022, to discuss concretely with proper democratic process, what is the future of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations for the rest of the 21st century. Freeze everything. Freeze looking at the 7 principles, freeze the COIC report, freeze the 8th principle. We can no longer go forward with this mix of sort of grassroots coming up this way and non-grassroots coming down this way, and consider that a progressive possibility of how to move forward for the rest of the 21st century when our voice must be heard on the international stage. My closing words are these. If you can do it, hold your hands up like this. Hold up your hands like that. Those who can do it, just hold up your hands like that. There we go, there we go. And if you see my hands, of course, it's very dark, whereas Kristen's hands are very light. Now we turn them around, and suddenly I've lightened up and everybody's got light. So all we can say is we're light and dark-skinned people whom the ruling class is divided for its racial basis. Let me now close, and Alan, get out your chalice. Here are my closing words. The chalice light glows in our eyes, even as we extinguish it. physically glowing in each of our skins, light or dark as they may be. Go now in peace as we proceed for the struggle to create the beloved community as an historical reality. Utopian, you say? Utopian today, flesh and blood tomorrow. So may it be. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. I'm extinguishing the candle. Now extinguished. Thank you all, and have a good tomorrow and a good week to come.
Thank you, Brother Tom, for participating. Thank you, my brother. Thank you for being with us.